Hello everybody, this week we're going to be talking about a Canadian whiskey, 40 Creek Premium Barrel Select. So grab your bottle, grab your glass, and meet me back here for a drink on the Whiskey Dictionary. Now since this is my first time going over a Canadian whiskey on this channel, why don't I go over some of the basics. First thing you might notice is that there's no E in the word whiskey here. Now that's not a requirement of a Canadian whiskey, however you'd be hard-pressed to find a distiller who doesn't do that. Now aside from that, they do not have any regulations around their barrels other than that they have to be aged for at least 3 years in an oak barrel. However, that could be a new oak barrel, an old oak barrel, a charred or uncharred, whatever they want. Canada has given the distiller the freedom to do whatever they'd like. Now that has unfortunately caused some bad practices, if I were to call it that, in Canadian whiskeys, which has given them bad names. They're able to add artificial coloring, like caramel coloring, and also outside flavors to the whiskey whenever they'd like. This is not frowned upon by Canada, however, absolutely frowned upon by the whiskey drinking community. And because of that, you may have heard that Canadian whiskeys aren't that great. However, you're not going to really get that in anything that you'd probably be buying. Typically, anything very, very low end might have that, but that's about it. So don't worry too much about that. Now let's talk about the bottle here. So something I find odd is that they've got a dark glass bottle. Now in a product where you're trying to sell based on, several things, smell, taste, and even appearance, color, why would you want to hide that through your bottle? I think that's very weird. However, that's not the weirdest thing about this bottle. So check this out. You've got a twist-off cap. Now, I know from doing some wine tastings or whatever that this is becoming a new trend in wine, that they'll use twist-off caps because it does keep the wine fresh longer. However, I've never seen it on a whiskey bottle, and I'm sure there's plenty of them. I've personally just never seen it. It strikes me as a little weird. I prefer to have a cork. Whatever. So, moving on, let's check out the color of this whiskey. Now, I'm going to pour a lot here because I have seen some of the other videos, and I know it's a little tougher to see the color. But if you look, you've got a very dark amber color going on here. Now, that's coming from the oak barrels. However, we've seen whiskeys aged in oak for longer than this whiskey is, and they typically are even a little lighter than this. So that could be because of the sherry barrels that it's finished in, but either way, I think that's pretty interesting. So why don't you go ahead and pour yourself a glass, and then we'll smell this and discuss what we smell. So go ahead. So first thing that you notice is first thing that I notice is that spice that you tend to get whenever you're aging anything in the oak barrel. That's kind of a given. Aside from that, you get a little bit of vanilla. You also tend to get that. However, this has a bit of fruit to it. Specifically, I pick up orange. Now, a couple days ago when I was first kind of researching this, I was sitting at a table trying a glass, and I was smelling it, and I just immediately got a whiff of orange, and I was so excited because, as I've mentioned in other videos, I don't have the best nose for this quite yet, and I was just psyched that I had picked up such a strong orange scent. Now, stupid me had forgotten that about 5 minutes before drinking my whiskey, I was eating a mandarin orange, and my fingers smelled like orange. So got up, went and washed my hands and everything, came back to the table and got back to smelling, and I still smelled orange. So I was like, man, I must have ruined it. I'm going to have to do this later. But out of curiosity, I went to their website and checked out what I should be smelling, and oranges is one of those items. So it may just be in my head, but to me, I can usually smell orange coming out of this. So if you're picking that up as well, I'd love to hear about it. But anything else that you that you can smell in this, let me know in the comments. Moving on, let's move on to taste, the fun part of this. Why don't you give this another minute to breathe here and swirl it around a little bit, because I'll go into this in a minute, but that should be about right. All right, cheers. All right, now the first thing that I taste is much spicier than any of the other whiskeys that I've reviewed so far. It's actually pretty strong. I like it actually a lot. Going into this review, I actually was not a huge fan of this whiskey, but during the course of tonight and over the last couple days, I've grown a little bit more accustomed to it, and I don't dislike it. It's still not one of my favorites, but I've definitely come to like it a little bit more. Anyway, so aside from spice, I can actually taste some of that orange, and this time I don't think it's in my head. I can kind of get it on the back of the tongue there. But one thing that you might notice is that the finish in your throat is very, very mild, I guess is the right word. It's it's flavorful, but it doesn't really hit you in the throat the way that you need to. And this is one of the things that their distilling process kind of gets them. So they end up taking 3 different types of grain. They've got barley, rye, and corn, and they'll age all 3 of them separately for about 6 to 10 years. And during the after each one has matured, however their distillers decide, they combine all 3 of them, and then they finish it for about 6 months in a sherry cask. This helps to round it off a little bit and actually gives you that back of the throat feel a little bit more mildly. So continue to drink, and I'll do like I normally do and tell you a little bit about the history of the company. So this guy named John Hall, he is the founder, and he started the company and everything. He's got a history of about 20 years or so in winemaking, and he decided that he wanted to move on to creating whiskeys. He says that basically nobody was doing anything interesting with Canadian whiskeys, so he wanted to be that guy. Now originally he didn't want to call it 40 Creek. He wanted to call it Johnny Hall Whiskey. He kind of saw people like Johnny Walker and Jack Daniels having their name on their whiskeys and thought that'd be a cool idea. However, he didn't think Johnny Hall whiskey sounded very good. I actually don't think it's a bad name. I wouldn't have thought twice about it really. But because of that, he started his distillery in a town called Grisby. But before it was Grisby, it was named after a creek that ran through that area called the 40. And they called it the 40 because it was 40 miles from Niagara Falls. They also used to use this creek to help them grow grains, and also they used a nearby waterfall to help their grist mill. So aside from that, he had no money when he first started the company, but he really wanted to finish the stuff in sherry barrels. Now, because of his history in winemaking, he thought, hey, you know what? I don't have the money to fly all the way to Spain, pick out some barrels, and come back. I'm just going to make my own sherry. So he took 10 years to make his own sherry. During the course of that, he was aging some whiskey and everything, but after the 10 years, he dumped out the sherry, and he then finished his whiskey in those sherry barrels. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this guy and this company, is that this guy had a talent, he had a skill, and he used that to help improve the taste of his whiskey. That alone makes this worthy of doing a review in my mind. So anyway, the whiskey, as I mentioned, is aged for about 6 to 10 years, and then it goes for 6 months in those sherry barrels. After that, they bottle it and everything. And now this particular whiskey has won all kinds of awards, which is part of the reason that I was a little annoyed that I didn't love it when I first tried it. However, it's won awards for the last 10 years or so. It's just been doing really, really well. And apparently apparently because they've done so well for the last 10 years or so, they've done a kind of like a master's collection. I forget what they call it, Special Reserve, I think it was. But if you remember one of our previous episodes, Woodford Reserve, they did the master's collection. They have a very similar thing. They call it Special Reserve. And last year's was called the Evolution for 2014. And apparently that is a phenomenal whiskey. So if you can get your hands on a bottle, I would be kind of surprised. They only made 9,000 of them. But if you ever see a bottle of it, you should pick it up if you like this whiskey. Otherwise, maybe don't bother. But anyway, that about does it for the history of this company. It's only from 1992. It's not a really long history. However, I want to talk about what I'm going to review next week. So I have a couple of bottles here on loan from my dad. He actually just got back from a cruise and picked up a bottle of the Balvenie Triple Cask, which apparently you can only really get outside of the States, and then the Balvenie Double Wood. Now they're both single malt scotches, and they're both aged 12 years. I'm looking very much forward to trying these. I haven't actually had these yet as of the time of recording this video. So at this point, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We also have a Facebook page, which is, several dozen actually at this point. It's still pretty early. Whiskey enthusiasts. So I'd love if you'd join and help grow that community. Aside from that, I'm fairly frequently on the whiskey subreddits, both with and without an E. So you can probably find me there. I post under The Whiskey Dick. And I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I'll see you next week.